Okay, the lesson that we are going to be looking at today is gender divisions in youth culture from a male perspective. Now, so just take this off the board. This is a really small topic. So it's good because you've obviously got an essay that's due today, one that was set last week. So those of you who've now just in a mad panic because you forgot to do it, hopefully that's none of you, should have a bit of time to finish up your essay at the end of this lesson, because this won't take you too long. We have to talk about a male perspective for gender, but I don't think it's likely to come up as a 15 marker or a 35 marker. It will be supplementary to the stuff that you've looked at for gender already. So we're going to start with at the top of page number 1. So the feminist perspective concentrates on how females have been ignored by sociologists, criticising functionist and Marxist perspective for being, missing word, means that it's research done by males and generalised to the wider population to include females. It is male stream research, that is your missing word. Some writers have suggested that youth cultures are masculine in nature because males are dominant. It is possible that girls were overlooked by early researchers. However, many early youth cultures were associated with males, and some showed signs of exaggerated masculinity. Now, those are you missing words. Now, I'm hoping that you're thinking of a specific subculture, and a specific subculture that links to a writer that we looked at in Marxism. I will be circling that and just doing a line off it and say Clark, because you can incorporate Clark into an essay if you wanted to talk about exaggerated masculinity. It's masculinity, it's not a problem. You're using the sociological knowledge that we've already covered. So, Greer, like many radical feminists, sees aggressive masculinity as being a big problem in society. So, here you get Barbara Ehrenreich, back in 1983. So, she gives beat culture as an example of a subculture where women are actively unwelcome. And it is a subculture which is focused entirely on men and where they're almost anti having women as part of a member of this group. And you could still suggest that this is the case today. Furlong and Cartmel, and this was I think a weakness of in your gender booklet that we did, what will be a couple of weeks ago now, would say that actually women are still excluded in certain subcultures or youth culture communities, such as online gaming, where perhaps some of the games, I'll just put Assassin's Creed on there. I don't really know anything about them, but some of the games will be focused on males, and the women won't be welcome within these because they're more kind of highly sexualized games, or more games which is like male as the main player and shoot 'em ups and things like that. So from the information that we've seen, it might be considered that actually things are really bad for women and things are absolutely great for men. But we need to give a bit of clarity. I always say the devil will be in the detail. So when we say and we hear lots of feminists saying we live in a completely male-dominated society, well, it's not really a society where all males dominate. It's just a society where probably very few dominate, but they all happen to be males. Now, Conal is going to make the judgment that there has been a neglect of issues that are male issues. And if you're in class now, you'd have some articles with you that would show you some of these issues, but there are 3. And here are 3 big issues for men. Issue number 1, which obviously you need to make a note of on the bottom of page number 1, is that suicide is the biggest killer of men under 45. I think if you're likely to be committing suicide under that age, 75% of the time you will be a male. That's going to be a problem. 95% of the prison population is male. The peak offending age of around 19, that will vary depending on what year it is, but 95% of the prison system are male. But yet you live in a society which is a patriarchy. I hear you cry against the feminists. Well, it's a very good point to put to them. Why would they marginalise such a huge group? And then the final one, and this may or may not be surprising, it previously was young black lads and young Bangladeshi lads, but now the group who are most likely to be excluded from school and leave with by far the lowest qualifications are working class white males. So potentially what we've got here is a big problem with masculinity that's going to have a long-term negative effect in our society. Turn your page over, please. Now, on the top of page number 2, it says, Conal claims that until recently British men have been socialised into hegemonic masculinity. What do we mean by hegemony and hegemonic masculinity? Now, I bet you've never heard that term before. And if I was Louise or Emma, I'll be able to explain it really, really simply. But as it's me, I'm going to explain hegemony through a riddle. And that is from the film Conan with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is the riddle of steel. Okay, now, in the riddle of steel, this is my question. What is more powerful, flesh or steel? Which has the more power? Think in your heads. What's more powerful, flesh or steel? You've got an idea? And now I'm going to watch a quick clip. This is from Conan. Now I don't think it's that loud, so I'm hoping you'll be able to hear. If not, I'll give you some. I'll give you an outline of what he says in a second.
He raised that snake the time it was born. You killed my mother. You killed my father. You killed my kids.
Great acting there from Arnie, isn't it? That surprised he didn't win the Oscar for this. He said, "You killed my father, my mother, my people." He's complaining that James, is it James Earl Jones? I always get his name confused. The guy who played Darth Vader, wasn't he? He did the voice for Darth Vader. I think it's James Earl Jones, but I could be wrong. That he's killed his family, now he's holding him prisoner.
You took my father's sword, huh?
And he says, "You took my father's sword," because Conan's obviously a warrior, and his dad was a warrior, and the guy took his father's sword. Pretty bad.
This must have been when I was younger. There was a time, boy, when I searched for steel. And steel meant more to me than gold or jewels.
So he says, "There's a time that I sought for steel, and steel meant more to me than anything else." And then Conan's going to recognise this, and he's going to say,
"The riddle of steel."
The riddle of steel. This is a great line.
Yes. You know what it is, don't you, boy?
Okay, so here is the riddle, and this was the question that we just asked. What was stronger, flesh or steel?
Shall I tell you? It's the least I can do. Steel isn't strong, boy. Flesh is stronger. Look around you. There, on the rocks. That beautiful girl. Come to me, my child. That is strength, boy. That is power. The strength and power of flesh.
So, he says, that is strength. That is power. The strength of flesh. And what he means is that he's got the woman to jump off the cliff because he's beckoned her. Because the idea of what he wants her to do is strong. It's the ideas behind things that are strong. You have to have a person to wield the steel. You have to have a person to do it. And the ideas behind that person are the thing that gives it power. Socially powerful people use their influence to convince others to follow their way of thinking. That is hegemony, right? So when we say hegemony, it's dominant ideology, the dominant way of thinking. And that is extremely powerful. It's so dominant that perhaps you live in a society, I mean, you just had Christmas, right? Most of you had a Christmas tree. That's dominant ideology there. That's the power of the idea. You've had it, you put it in your living room. Ideas are stronger than steel. because it's the ideas that wield the steel. It's the ideas that make people do things. So, here's what needs to go in the box on page number 2 is, Conal claims until recently most British men were socialised into hegemonic masculinity. And hegemonic masculinity means the dominant form of masculinity. Strength, control, heterosexuality. All of these things are what it means to be a man, being macho. Hence why I put Randy Savage on the front of the PowerPoint. It explains how men are able to maintain dominance over women. Anything feminine is viewed or presented as interior. And you need to think about some of the swear words that you use in society. Often, if you see a boy being upset or a man being upset, he gets referred to as a swear word that means a female genital part. I'm not going to say it on camera because it's too rude and YouTube will demonetize me. Not that I'm getting any money off this anyway. But that's how we view it as inferior. And those are the names that you call people. The names that you call boys that are the most offensive names that you could call them, because they don't want to be associated with the feminine. Yeah, so even phrases, you know, we get the boys don't cry and things like that, but you know, the offensive ones, they're the ones that really have the biggest impact. Now, the role of men, once you've got that bit down there at the top, the main roles of men is what we would normally and traditionally see, and there's that Fresher Coffee advert that we looked at before, are financial providers, authority figures, disciplinarians. These are the 3 traditional roles of the men, which is here, right? And traditionally, young men are expected to demonstrate aggressiveness, risk-taking, ambition, individualism. These are the things that make up hegemonic masculinity. You have to be a risk-taking, aggressive man with ambition, thinking about yourself. And that is what Conal suggests is potentially negative. It's what could be the reason that we have more men in prison. It's the reason that we might have more male suicides. And that this potential view of men not being able to participate in emotional work, not being able to get across their feelings, could be responsible for some of these problems. Here's a very good example. Mr. Muscle. Now, I remember Mr. Muscle looks like that now, doesn't he? But that was the old Mr. Muscle. Mr. Muscle used to look like a very weedy man. And the implication, I think, there was that, like, if you were him and if you were a male and you were doing housework, you were that kind of a male, like a real beta male. Now they've made Mr. Muscle and people like Mr. Clean and Mr. Sheen, they've made them all the quite tough, quite macho men, because maybe it needs a macho man to properly clean a surface. I don't know. Okay? But that seems to be a good example. So, what Conal is going to say, if you turn on to page number 3, is that things are starting to change. And there are different types of masculinity that do exist in maybe opposition to the hegemonic masculinity that we still see. And it's a good question, it's a shame that we're not in now, to see whether or not that debate's still the case. Because you might say that if you look back at the 1950s, 1940s, 1930s, 1920s, a man is all of those things. He's the controller, he's the risk taker, he's the financial provider, he's the breadwinner at home. But now in 2020, are things different? We have house husbands and things like that. Are men now more able to talk about their emotion? Are they more able to dress in a way that they want to dress? Can they wear makeup? Can they have a presentation that's not about toughness and being macho? Now, you might say that the new man is totally different, but that's up to you, and that's the beauty of sociology, right? There isn't an answer. If you think that it's still expected that men have got to be super tough, and it's hegemonic masculinity that's still the main thing that's thrust on them, then I probably agree with you to some extent. But I certainly agree with Conal, who might suggest that there are other types of masculinity. And here are 3. Complicit, subordinate and marginalised. Now they're not going to be in the right order here. So you've got to consider on page number 3 which one is which to go in the description, and an image so that you remember the different type of masculinity that we're talking about here. So which one could be which? Complicit means going along with something. Subordinate means underneath, okay? So the bottom type. And marginalised means kind of pushed to one side. Okay, hopefully you've paused and you've got a rough idea. We'll be going through these now. So when you look at subordinate masculinity, an example of that is homosexual men. They are a stigmatised group in society. They don't demonstrate the traditional norms of masculinity. Now obviously, remember, it's all a stereotype game here, because there might be some homosexual men who are super masculine. But what Conal is going to say is that there are some homosexual men that are going to be subordinate. They've got a stigmatised identity below that rank of the aggressive alpha male, hegemonic masculine person that we would expect. When we look at marginalised masculinity, these come from even, and this is where some of the problems are going to lie, from working class men. And you're like, well, working class men are maybe more traditionally exaggerating their masculinity. Look at the skinheads, for example. But perhaps a decline in the work that is traditionally masculine, factories, coal mines, etc., which we're going to talk about later, is leading to them feeling like they're pushed to one side. That could have an effect. And then obviously that leaves complicit masculinity. The new man, okay, the man who's more in touch with their feelings, more in touch with their emotions, who might be more inclined to share in the feminine role. So make sure that you've got your different types of masculinity put in your book, and an image relating to those that is on page number 3. Before we go on to page number 4, because page number 4 you're only going to do the top bit and you're going to leave the bit about straight edge to the end of the lesson if you've got time. We're going to look at gender convergence. Now, it says on here, writers such as Bennett and Willis have pointed out that there is a blurring of sexuality and gender, sometimes called gender convergence. Now, you've looked at gender convergence before. I want you to tell me, what does it mean? Give me an example of it happening. You don't have to put your initials on it because you're just going to be writing it in there, okay? So, at this point, can you tell me what we mean by gender convergence? Can you give me an example? Just stick it in there and just post it to me, just send it me so I know, right, you're up to speed, I've done this, okay? So just something to send through, do it in the chat, type it out, or just take a quick picture of it and think about who you are going to link it to that was an example of it last week. Make sure you give me the name of the subculture, the key writer, and how that was an example of gender convergence. Yeah. Okay. Hope you didn't see the answer there. Now, on page number 5, and we're almost done here, remember? This will be it at the end of page 5. We're going to look at this fella. Now, this fella is one fella, and he's on his own. He's not two fellas. He's just one fella, but he's got an unusual surname that might make you think he's two fellas. So try to remember, this guy is called Martin, Mac and Gale. Not Mac and Gale, he's only one person, his name is Martin. Now Martin, Mac and Gale is going to say that men have got a big problem. And men's problem is that they are experiencing a crisis, okay? A crisis of masculinity. There's an issue with what it means to be a man. And the issue with what it means to be a man stems from a change in traditional roles. And that really starts from a change in the workplace. And you can certainly see where Conal, when Conal's talking about marginalised masculinity and working class men being marginalised, you can see it here in Mackingale's theory of a crisis of masculinity. Now, Mackingale's crisis of masculinity exists because jobs have changed and the needs behind those jobs has changed. So traditionally, men are in the factories and they're doing manual work. Now, think about Paul Willis's Learning to Labour here. What don't you need if you're doing a factory job or a mining job? And then women are not at work, they're at the home. Or if they are in a working environment, such as factory, they are doing a job. And it's typing. They would be doing a secretary's job because it requires the phone and it requires typing. They were considered women's work, right? But now, and if you look and you can see my computer over there, that's my job. Every day I'm on the phone. Every day I'm on the computer. Every day I'm typing emails and writing stuff out. Now, what we've got here are 7 elements in a flow diagram that explains how we've got to the point where males' masculinity is threatened and they are in a crisis. So have a look at these and just in your head plan, where does it start with, obviously starts with the earliest, and where does it go to? What is the most modern one? How has Mac and Gale gone from 50 years ago to now to explain how men are in some significant trouble? What you're going to do then, when we go through it, is you are going to put this into your books on page number 5, and as you will see, you've got space for your flow diagram there, where you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's going to explain how we end up with men in a crisis of masculinity. And here is a bit of an overview that might help you put those in order. Starting with education and jobs, women as secretaries, then back to education, then something that says closed, then a computer, and then a man looking a bit puzzled. Here we go. Stage 1, education is not important for men. Manual jobs are available. Think of Paul Willis's Learning to Labour. Number 2, factories are going to take on a lot of workers and they don't need those educational requirements. Happy days. Number 3, the women's jobs are traditionally secretarial, means that they're going to be answering the phones, they're going to be on the typewriter. Number 4, factories and mines are going to shut down. Globalisation, the world getting smaller, it's going to mean that they can outsource the mining and the factories abroad because it's cheaper labour, so the jobs are going to go. And then when the job starts going, education becomes more important again. Problem is, the roles that are now available require education and require you to do typing and computer work that are typically female jobs. This is going to lead to a crisis of masculinity, where men are no longer the breadwinner and they do not feel that they understand what it is to be a male. Their masculinity is threatened. And this could potentially lead to lots of problems. The likes of suicide that we've looked at before, but also the crisis of masculinity will explain why men are violent or aggressive or confrontational. This is the theory that Mac and Gale would say. And if you look at the bottom of page 5, sociologists argue that men have responded in different ways to the crisis of masculinity. One way they responded is by taking on a very aggressive, macho, homophobic, anti-woman form. For example, Frith and Mahoney suggest that boys demonstrate aggressively intimidating behaviour towards girls and female teachers in school because they are in a crisis, because educationally they're not doing so well, and they are worried about going out into the wider world because what they think of as being a man no longer really exists. Okay. Page number 5. Evaluate the view that male youth cultures are more deviant than female youth cultures. So, this is a topic question because it's focusing on deviance, and I think it was the question that you started and you did a paragraph from the other week. I think it was worded something similar. So, as it says on top, in this essay you will have spent some time writing a paragraph like you did last week on girl gangs. But you need to evaluate against the statement, right? And the statement is suggesting that male youth cultures are more deviant, so you're going to need to agree with the fact that male youth cultures could be more deviant. And what I want you to do is write a paragraph using Mac and Gale's theory of a crisis of masculinity to suggest that actually men in youth cultures are going to be more deviant than females. So, remember, the work of Mac and Gale focuses on, link this to the question. The question is, the view that male youth cultures are more deviant than female youth cultures, is he going to agree or is he going to disagree? Well, because of the crisis of masculinity, he's obviously going to agree that male youth cultures are going to be more deviant. He's developed his theory of crisis of masculinity, which is, what does this theory mean? Rather than focusing on females becoming more delinquent, he would argue that, explain why his theory is going to tell you that men are going to be more delinquent, and tell me why this is going to be the case. Finally, when you get to the back end of any paragraph, remember it's time to start making judgments and evaluating it. Here is Frith and Mahoney, whose study would be very supportive of what Mac and Gale say. So you need to put that in as well. And you've got page 6 and page 7 to write out this paragraph. Okay. Once you're done, you've got to send it to me. So what will be submitted today is your 35 marker that was due today, so that will be done. The little section where you've defined what gender convergence is and given me an example, and this piece of written work need to be submitted. Remember, submit them as you go, so don't wait around and submit it all at one time. Do it all as you go. Final thing that I want you to look at, and this is if you have time, because it might be something interesting to consider. It could also be a useful example of a modern day kind of youth subculture, is straight edge on page number 4. So the questions that are there say, what is straight edge, what does it mean? And there's a slide on the next one which has got one of the guys from this little documentary to talk about it. Now, I don't expect you to watch it all, but if you want to spend some time developing another example that you could throw into an essay, then that's absolutely fine as well. But obviously, you've got a busy lesson for submitting a lot of work, so I shall leave that up to you. But obviously, the options there to crack on and watch this should you feel you've got a bit of spare time. Okay, right then, guys. Next week, I believe we will be looking at interactionism. So another big theory, but hopefully not a taxing one. And then it starts to get to some shorter topics as we start to go through deviance, ethnicity, class, and education. And you give it probably 6 or 7 lessons, and it's done. We finished the topic.